Hey everyone, thank you guys for tuning into this month's installment of Conscious Conversations featuring the awesome team of mental health therapists at Nashville Emotional Wellness Counseling in Nashville, Tennessee. My name is Bree. I am a child and adolescent therapist here at New, and today I'm joined by Amiee, and we're excited to spend this time with you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amiee, and today we will be unpacking the topic of family dynamics. Conscious conversations are intended to educate, uplift, and provide guidance on how to deal with life stressors. One of the things that I say is life be lifing, and it comes up in all different kinds of ways. And I think for a lot of us, families um, are the root of a lot of those like life in moments. So our motto here at New is real people helping real people with real problems. So these conversations are an opportunity to have real talk with our therapist. So let's dive in.
Yeah. So, as Ami said, today's topic is family dynamics. And I guess we just want to start by talking about how do people actually define family? And I'll say for me, that definition has definitely changed over the years growing up. And I actually never thought about it till I was preparing for this actually conscious conversation. But of course, growing up, my first understanding is, oh, family is my blood relatives. And then my second understanding came from outside of that with my mom being a foster parent, and I ended up having four siblings that were adopted. And so that changed my whole view of family because now it's no longer blood relation. And now it is adopted family members coming into our family as well. So more so legal ties. Then my third understanding came from when I stepped out on my own and went to college and shared dorm rooms for 3 years with the same girls. And so, that changed my whole perspective of now it's not just blood, now it's not just legal ties, but these are like connection and experience ties. And so they grew to be my family as well. And then, of course, relationships. So I'm in a 5-year relationship, and he is no doubt someone who I consider family. His family is my people that I consider family as well. And so I I don't know what the stereotypical definition of family is, I guess, for everybody in a general aspect, but I know for me, it's constantly changed throughout my lifetime. But what about you? How do you see people have defined family from your perspective?
It's so interesting because I've had kind of the similar um, like evolution of understanding, right? Because as a kid, like family was my mom and my dad, and then eventually the little brother that I never asked for. I wanted a little sister, ended up with a brother. May or may not have tried to flush him down the toilet, but he was too big and he wouldn't go. But that was our family. And then also we were really close with our grandparents. My grandmother and my grandfather, the maternal side, were very, very involved. At one point, we all lived together. And then, my dad's parents were not as involved, but I was still really close to them. And so my initial idea of family was just this, like, these are the people who I'm related to by blood. Um, my mom was a juvenile court judge. So while we didn't adopt um, anyone into our family, I started seeing changes when like my uncle got married and he had a stepson. And so that's when I started to see like the understanding of like the legal aspect of families changing. So not just by blood, but blood marriage. I had friends who were adopted, friends who were in foster care. So like my definition of family changed then. And then, like you, went to college, started making new friends, and like these are my sisters. And actually, in high school, really, I had a really close group of friends. They like our nickname was the Brat Pack. And there were four of us, but like to this day, like these are my sisters. And well, my sisters and a brother. But it changed then. And I'm also gay, so there were a lot of changes in family dynamics then. When I got into gay culture, I started to really understand like these chosen family groups, and like it's not just oh, this is my friend who is like a sister to me. Like there are actual like structures of families. I'm part of a gay family, and so I have a drag mom and a drag dad and drag siblings, and all of those different relationships. Um, and then I had my own child, which also shifted because the people who should have been family by blood weren't as involved in my child. So, like, technically they're family, but I also don't necessarily consider them family anymore because of their view or approach to how I chose to live my life. Um, and then with partners, I've been married and divorced. So, like, I have the extended family from my ex-wife, who I still consider family, even though she's no longer part of my family. In relationships, I have stepkids who aren't like legally my stepkids, but who like still call me mom. And now my current partner, she has children who I don't have like a physical relationship with, but in my mind, they're almost like my stepkids. So I think of them when I think of my kids. So like family just means so much to so many people, and it's
Yeah.
always evolving and it's always changing. And like what we consider family just shifts based on sometimes where we are in life.
Yeah, I agree. Great way to put it. Just the whole shifting of just where we are in our different stages of life. But I also love like your nickname with the Brats Pack. That's so cute.
Like it's so funny. So we're the brats. And when I think about like my stepkids, they don't call me Amy or Amiee, they call me Namie. I have a son who I fostered from the time he was 13 until adulthood. And I'm always Mamala, which was so when Kamala came out and that was her nickname, I was like, oh, I'm not the only Mamala. But like, titles have a lot to do with how we think of family. I have people who I call mom, no blood relationship whatsoever. But like they play that role in my life. So
Right,
like all of that, like the naming of it, I think is also really interesting.
for sure. Well, if we get into an official definition, I found a pretty good one that's what I would say is very stereotypical from HRSA, which is the Health Resources and Service Administration. And this is the 2023 definition, but it just says a group of two or more people related by birth, marriage, or adoption who all live together. And
I
that,
think that's interesting and also limiting, but interesting, right?
yeah. And I find like I tried to, that was one of the most common definitions. Even like when I looked at the Cambridge definition, I think that was the most updated one with 2024. And it was a very similar definition as well.
Like I've always wondered why we put the birth, marriage, or adoption
Yeah.
um, as like the definition of family because like there are kids who I have essentially raised who did not give birth to, did not marry into the family, didn't officially adopt them. But like those are my kids and like I'm their parent. Um, and I think that's maybe where a lot of feelings come up around family is because we have this really narrow definition of what family is supposed to be. And
Yeah.
then the reality and the life of it doesn't always match up. So like it feels like you're almost in a wasteland.
Right. It's interesting how titles, because I feel like family to me is the umbrella term for all the titles, but the titles are more versatile than the actual family word itself.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. When I think about like what makes a family, I'm sure there are lots of definitions around that. But for me, the family is the people who, you know, say it how you want to, but like the people who chose to love me when they didn't have to.
Yeah.
Um, and like for me, that's the important piece. And it doesn't mean that, everything is all sunshine and rainbows, but it means that at the end of the day, these are the people I can depend on. Doesn't matter how I got them, but they're here.
Mhm. I agree. So I found this other definition, or not definition, but mainly like description of what makes a family that is way more fluent and versatile that I actually really liked how it was worded. But it said that a family is more than just a group of people connected by blood or law. It is defined by the relationships, emotional bonds, responsibilities, and shared experiences that create a sense of belonging and mutual support, whether that's through biological ties, legal ties, chosen connections. What makes a family is a commitment to care for and support each other, creating a foundation of love, trust, and shared values. So I think that's everything that you just kind of said, a little bit more linked out, but I also think that everything that we just talked about as it relates to how our personal definitions of family have changed through our personal stages of life as well.
Absolutely. I think the big thing in there is mutual support.
Yeah.
As therapists, I think we talk a lot about like the mother wound and the father wound. And then like as an adult, you understand that, or in most cases, you understand that your parents did the best they could, but sometimes the best they could wasn't enough. So like we have to kind of redefine what we expect a parent to be. And like for those who grew up in an adoptive family or who grew up in foster care, they maybe never had that like mom role or a dad role. So, how does that mean that they didn't have family? Of course not. But the definition changes. And I think that has a lot to do with family dynamics. Um, that's our topic, and we're talking a lot about family dynamics, and I think it means different things to different people. But the National Institutes of Health defines family dynamics as referring to the pattern or interactions among relatives, their roles and relationships, and the various factors that shape their interactions. Because family members rely on each other for emotional, physical, and economic support, they are one of the primary sources of relationship security or stress. Um, for me, the key word there is stress. um,
Yeah.
because there are some interactions that are so tense, like it's just easier for me to not have them. And that's after being a therapist, having years of therapy, just like understanding that just because you're related to somebody by blood doesn't mean that they're going to be family. And I think that's like a hard thing for people to kind of deal with. So I think the follow-up question of that is, what are some of the different types of like family structures or family dynamics?
Gotcha. So just going off like the basic family dynamics, I have six that we can kind of explore. First one is the nuclear family dynamic. So nuclear, never heard of the word nuclear before, honestly, when I was kind of doing my research into this topic, but basically the way I view it is just traditional family dynamics. So it's just a traditional family consisting of two parents and their children, biologically or adopted, living together. And it's really interesting to me that in the traditional family dynamics, I don't know why, but adopted is in there. Is that, how do you think about that?
There's so many things about that. Like I've always heard the term nuclear family, and for me, it brings to mind this image of, mom, dad, 2.5 kids, the dog, and the white picket fence. And like that's it. So how the kids got there, who knows? But
Yeah,
when I think about like the history of family structures, like in the US, we have this very strict idea of what a family is supposed to be. But in other cultures, like it wasn't like a traditional adoptive situation. It was someone had a kid they couldn't take care of. They became part of the family. Like no one really asked questions about it. The kid became part of the family. And so maybe that's how, the adopted piece came in. Or maybe it's because, in our society, we have this formal method of adopting someone, giving them legal recognition and status. And so when we're thinking about a family, that's part of it. The other piece of it that always has kind of like, you know, blown my mind is, does a family only exist if there are children there? Because what
yeah,
happens to you know, people who can't have children, people who choose not to have kids, which I think is a very, very personal choice, but also a valid choice. Like if I'm married, my spouse and I are still family with or without the addition of, a little crumb snatcher. Now
yeah,
I say that jokingly. I have a kid. She's 18. We move her into college next week, but like my partner and I are still a family, even if she's not here, even if
yeah,
she never existed, right? So I think that is also a stressor for a lot of people, especially adults. Your biological clock is ticking, or people are like, when are you going to have kids? Like, I don't know, maybe never, but does that make me like less of a family, less of a person, less of whatever? Um, you know. And then you have like the four-legged kids, so like the pet parents, right? Are
yeah,
they less of parents or less of family because they don't have kids? Like with the traditional little, baby or adopted child, they just have like the puppy. We have all these different ideas of how we've been socialized to view family.
right. And I think it's important, how you pointed out that how with your daughter turning 18, like once she leaves the house, is that not considered a family? Because I noticed that all of these definitions are so strict on like the words living together. And so if you literally look at the literal definition, it would make sense for someone to logically think, oh, well, I'm not a family no more because my child is out of the house and we're not living together.
Right. Or like when your children grow up and become adults, like your child is always your child. You
Yeah.
are always that child's parent. Does that, am I less important because, I'm not paying rent for all of us? Like, how do we make that definition and why have we accepted that as the definition? That's a whole nother conversation
Yeah.
for another day.
Yeah. But moving into other family dynamics. So another dynamic is the single parent family dynamic. So just where one parent is responsible for raising the child. Then you have the extended family dynamic. So a family structure that includes relatives beyond the traditional family, such as grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, often living together or maintaining close ties. You have that blended family dynamic. So a family formed when one or both partners in a relationship have children from previous relationships, creating a whole entire new family unit. You have those child-free family dynamics, which is what we just talked about. So a family structure where a couple chooses not to have children either temporarily or permanently. And then you have the same-sex family dynamics. So same-sex is a clinical term that they typically use in our field, but essentially we just mean two people who share the same identity. So a family where the parents or caregivers of the same gender identity, raising children together or living as a couple.
I think one of the family dynamics you talked about is the extended family dynamics. And it's so interesting to me that I feel like that is very much so an American thing. But when we look at like other cultures, multi-generational households are the norm.
Hmm.
I did study abroad in India, and like every family had either the maternal grandparents or like the wife's the one spouse's parents like living in the household. That's the norm there. That's the norm in a lot of Asian countries. Um, we can always get into some of the sociological aspects of that, but multi-generational households are the norm in other places. And I think because it's like some of the financial things happening here, it's becoming more common here, right? We always talk about you go to college and you leave the nest, but there is this phenomenon that people are coming back to the nest and creating multi-generational households. And when you think about it from like the support, like the mutual support aspect of it, if you have a single parent and you have a grandma or an aunt who lives in the house, like that extends the ability for support. Being a single parent is rough. And having to be, mom and dad and all these other things when you have another person in the household to kind of share that responsibility with, like in a lot of ways that increases the stability of the family, unless you have like those tense moments, sometimes with mothers and daughters, it gets interesting. So if you have grandma, mom, and daughter, you have all of those dynamics at play at the same time. So like, what do we do then? I know my relationship with my daughter is super strong, but when you bring my mom into the conversation, it gets real stressful real quick because mom has her ideas, my daughter has her ideas, I'm somewhere in the middle, like we're in that sandwich generation type of deal. And so I think it also makes that interesting to have that conversation. um you know i I'm a researcher at heart. I love to know all the things. And so one of the things that came up from something else I was doing that is super applicable is this idea of triangulation, right? I live in threes. Everything is in, the rule of three. Um, and in families, when we think about like the nuclear family structure, you have mom, dad, and kid, it creates the perfect triangle, which is great in a lot of ways, but it also becomes a thing, right? Because you hear about like kids positioning parents against each other.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that happens. I think we see that in a lot of the work that we do, even like into adulthood. The strongest shape with the smallest number of sides is a triangle, right? And so a lot of times you have mom and dad, or parent one and parent two, and then the kid here. And
Hmm.
if the kid leans this way, it changes the structure. If the kid leans that way, it changes the structure. And if like parent one and kid get together against parent two, what happens then, right? So I think the my question is have you seen that in your work, and how do we create that balance, right? Because we need the base, and you
Yeah.
start adding kids, it becomes kids parent. So like are the kids like shifting the triangulation, are they going one way or the other? Like what happens when that becomes the thing?
I definitely see that a lot, especially when it comes to blended families and divorced families, but, or divorce separated. But I think the biggest thing that I teach, or not, I guess educate when it comes to this perspective that I come across in the field is I work a lot with the parents. So a lot of parent training on more so like coming together and not necessarily having the dynamic of mom is the one who's always just emotional, dad doesn't do that, and dad is the more like strict one, rule setting one. And even like for other types of other blended families as well, as you have parent one who is maybe more emotional, and then you still have that other parent who is more strict. And so I found the concept of eliminating that as a whole, and like both parents can have an equal amount of empathy and both parents can have an equal amount of strictness, and they're just having a conversation to where like we're on the same page when it comes to this, and so you're receiving the same type of emotion as well as discipline and guidance from both sides instead of having that labeled, because I think it that stereotypical concept of the family dynamic will always, from what I'm seeing, always kind of sets it up to the one who's more empathetic and less strict is the fun parent. So they're gonna naturally lean more to this side of the triangle. And the one parent who is stricter is like, no, and more like on them. It's like there's a lot of love there, but you ain't got it like this parent got it. And so it's just I think it's a matter of, in my work, just having that open conversation of it doesn't have to be like that. Like we don't have to adhere to the stereotypical version of a parent one and a parent two, but it can be like we can come together as a force and create like what makes sense for your family dynamic. And the same for like divorced families. I get that a lot of course, because divorced families are separated in different households. I'm not going to say it's like for every situation, but the ones that I've seen the most is it's almost like they're competing against each other because of the
Yep.
situation. And so, like, having that conversation too of, like, hey, like, this is one, like, your child's probably going through a lot. And then you guys competing and making like talking bad about each other and all that stuff just makes it worse. And it actually honestly makes it lean like the one thing that I've seen the most is like if a partner or one parent is talking really bad about another parent, then it actually that parent will think that, oh, like they're gonna feel badly about that parent and geared more towards me. But I've actually seen the opposite of like, oh, well, you're kind of talking bad about my parent. I'm not really feeling that. And so um I'll say all that to say like just having a rethinking and re processing like what your role looks like as a parent or a guidance for your child, and forming, not necessarily sticking to that traditional role that they have out there, but more so looking at what role makes sense for your family and how can you put it at a balance level to where the child isn't going back and forth or having some type of hierarchy level.
Like I'm going to age myself when I say this, but like it's like from High School Musical. We're all in this together.
Yeah.
Like regardless of what our like legal or like technical status is, the goal is that we are able to operate together for the best interests of us, or for the best interests of the kids, or for the best interests of, the dog sometimes, right? Um, I think the whole idea of a united front is super important because kids in general, but like people tend to play their role. And like, if I know I can manipulate this situation by aligning here, they're going to do it. And so if you make that obvious, of course, kids are gonna be like, oh, I'm gonna go hang out with dad. He's fun. I don't have any rules over here, right? When kids need balance and structure, if you set yourself up as the authoritative parent, like no, or not even parent, but like spouse or partner, like no, things have to be done this way and this way only. Like, what room are you giving your partner or your kids to like grow and change? The other thing that kind of came up when you were talking was this idea of, you know, how do we how do we operate in a way that is going to be healthy long term, especially like if parents are divorcing or a family is separating. There are a lot of big feelings there, but should kids be involved in that? Right? Like my mom was not great about the whole, never talking bad about the other parent. She had very strong feelings about my dad. And I think part of it was just her managing her emotions within a separation,
Yeah.
and her own disappointments and all of those things. And then like the emotional, like sharing the emotional burden of that with me somewhat inappropriately, but whatever. But like my dad was adamant about never talking bad about my mom. And like my mom always said that she was never going to talk bad about my dad, but it didn't always happen that way. But like I think, but it's just like you said, like I always had more respect for my dad for letting me be a kid in that situation. Because some of the things that my mom said like ended up not necessarily being true, and so that shifted my perspective of her, like as I got older. And like kids are more one resilient, but also more perceptive than we give them credit for being. So when we are going through this thing of maybe demonizing the other parent, like I think they see the truth in that, you know, sometimes quicker than we can even see our own truth in it. Um, so when we're thinking about what is a healthy dynamic or what might be an unhealthy dynamic. Um, what are some of the indications that you've seen of like a healthy family? And I know that that's different for everybody, but like, what are some of the things that we think show up there?
So I think one of the things that first shows up is just having honest and open communication. So that can look like regular face-to-face discussions where family members respect one another by listening and understanding someone's perspective. And that's also one of the things that I actually encourage when I work with families is having, they don't have to call it family meetings, but I just call it like family meetings or like weekly recaps where everybody just sits down and talk about like what are the highs and lows of the week. Like something just as simple as that, just having like a whole family communication that gets people talking just about like the highs and lows, but it also lets like kids see that it's okay to talk about these emotions and hey, like, parents go through it too. I think supportiveness, just parents taking an active role in the children's life, appreciating them for their individuality, and offering support for decisions and goals that their children wish to undertake. Saying on the parent side as well, them doing that to each other. Siblings also being supportive of one another as well. Having a strong sense of safety and security where the family members feel like they belong or they just experience positive emotional well-being in their interactions. A good amount of love and care, of course. So family members who are in tune with each other's needs, openly expressing their affections and demonstrating it through gestures and actions that they convey love and caring, showing value and respect, where all family members believe in making their other family member feel important or appreciated. And then the ability to like address conflict in a healthy way. So working together to resolve or repair conflict so that relationships between family members become more strong and more resilient.
Um, so, every time you say something like all the things pop up. So when we were talking about open and honest communication, I think part of that ties into the feeling of safety and security and love and caring and like understanding how people communicate. I'm not good at talking, like, I get paid to talk. That's my job.
Yeah.
But like when it comes to my own stuff, like I don't want to talk about it. Um, and that maybe I don't want to talk about it. I can't talk about it without getting emotional. So
Yeah.
like for me, one of the ways that I've managed like relationships with partners and with my daughter, and really all the kids is like texting. We are in 2024, everything can happen without face to face, right? I think face to face is important, but if we're thinking about like anxiety and how to manage feelings, sometimes people need to be able to express things over text to get the full thought out, and then we come back and talk about it,
Right.
right? So I think that's part of the communication piece is communicating in a way that is helpful for everyone, and like parents especially being able to adjust their communication style to their kids. Getting my daughter to sit down and have a conversation with me about something serious, I love her. I do. But like sometimes I just want to shake her. She's a kid. She's older, so we don't have shaken baby syndrome to worry about. But like I'm like, why can't you just talk to me? But then I think back to when I was like 16, 17, I couldn't talk to my mom without crying. And even though like I'm super open, I'm like, let's hug it out. My mom was not like that person. So if I cried, it was suck that up. Nobody cares about your tears. And I think a lot of like older parents kind of have that mentality because they weren't allowed to express emotion. They have a
Yeah.
hard time with their kids expressing emotion. So, like for us who are like in that middle ground, can we have the conversation over text first? Right? Can we get the big points out so everyone has a chance to kind of work through the feelings so we can have a productive conversation? I have a drawer full of letters my daughter has written me starting at like 5, when she had to express something that she couldn't like verbalize. And like, of course, the 5-year-old letter was, I don't like cooked broccoli. Don't make me eat it again. And broccoli was spelled in a very interesting way. But that was her first like, Mom, I need to communicate this thing, but I can't do it. And I think for me, that was super important because I had the opportunity at that point to like hear what she was saying without making her feel like she couldn't share that. And I think so that's a huge part of it. And like the supportive piece of it, if your kid is coming to you, even if it's like very, very small to you, like for them, this is huge. So like part of being that supportive person, that supportive partner, that supportive parent is like meeting people where they are. There's
Right.
sometimes my partner will bring things to me and I'm just like, okay, that sounds very minimal. But like if you minimize their feelings, are they going to continue wanting to share with you? So like I think that all plays into it. Like if I don't create a safe space for them to share, they're not going to keep sharing. Why would you? Who wants to do that? So I think that all goes into all of those dynamics. Um, how how did those dynamics show up for you like growing up and like now? Because I know a lot of these, I'm like, that would have been nice. That would have been great. But like, I feel like we might have different backgrounds on how we came to understand like family dynamics. So what were yours growing up?
Absolutely. So I would say, from my perspective, I definitely would say I had a pretty healthy family dynamic. There was always honest and open communications, even when kind of thrown off guard a little bit, when they would bring them up. But like there was, I feel like nothing that whenever there was any type of situation, nothing that I felt from my perspective I could sit down and talk about because I think that that was just the environment that my parents created. It was kind of like a open communication, but also like judgment-free environment. Excuse me. Very supportive in anything and everything that any of us wanted to do. They were always there through, I don't even know how they were there. Again, like it's 6 of us, so they were there like constant. Like when I think back now to it, I feel like my parents, especially my mom, are like real superheroes because it's just like how I can't even like do this for like the dog sometimes and and that's not as many responsibilities as a child, but like thinking about you're here, there, taking a kid there, showing up there, supporting there. Like I can only imagine. And so I definitely looking back on it, very, very appreciative. They're very supportive. I always felt like I have that safety and security when it comes to my emotions or any type of interactions, just going up and, sitting by my mom and just kind of having those conversations on the couch or my dad. Definitely felt the love and the care for sure. I was probably one of the most spoiled ones, so that may be why. But I also feel like everything that, and it could just be um some of my behavior. So I guess if you were to look at like the perfect child, they probably viewed me as the perfect child, like good grades, never had any issues, doing stuff on the side that they didn't know about. But like they were just like they just had that image of me. And so I don't know if that like played a part into it as well. But like there was never any conflict if we had any type of disagreement. I mean, of course, like the little like you said no, like I want to do this and that, but I think it helps that I'm very independent as well. So like as I got older, or I started getting older with my dad having his own business, I didn't like the word no, but it was never something, it was just my mindset. It was never something that I'd never argued with. So I was like, oh, you said no? Okay, I'm gonna go get a job and I don't have to ask you guys for nothing. And that changed, like, that created like a different level of respect from my parents and me of like, oh, like she's really on it. Like, and so that took away that whole no. But even then when I was little, I was like, well, what can I do around the house? How can I make money? So I never looked at no as something to sit, probably when I was younger, of course, but like when I hit the adolescent stage, no as something to sit there and pat about. I looked at, okay, well, what can I do to make it a yes? And I think
Right.
that my mindset growing up within my family dynamic is what made it look like a healthy perspective from my vision for me. But again, so I have siblings, four siblings who are adopted. One we adopted when he was 3 and I was like in middle school. No, I take that back. Two, and I was in elementary school. And then one we adopted a sibling group of 3 when I was in high school. And
Wow.
so I think that if you were to ask me, I would say, yeah, healthy relationship all through a healthy family dynamic. But I feel like it's so different from all my siblings' lens. So my older brother, the first child, um, he would definitely not say he had a healthy family dynamic when it comes to him and my dad. Same person, they're juniors, he's a senior, same name, same personality, same everything. And they always, still to this day, butt heads because they're the same person. And then you have my second to oldest brother, which is the first person that we adopted. He is, outside of me, the most spoiled person in the family for sure. And I would say that yes, he had from his perspective, he would say it was a very healthy dynamic, family dynamic as well, but like he had challenges with just, wondering who like where his original family origins came from and things like that. But then the sibling group of 3 is a whole different story. Because they came in a little bit later. And so we had in that sibling group of 3, it was like a 2-year-old, and then the other 2 were in adolescent age. So they're showing with like, now there's a dynamic in parenting styles that are different from what they're used to because they came from a single parent family or single parent family home. So now the dynamics are different, the feelings of belonging are different. Um, them like kind of, so they already knew like their family origins too, but just having like that aspect on top of like the conflict going on, belonging from one, just being in a whole new environment, but also belonging from my brothers, I love them, but they weren't the most nicest brothers growing up. And so, seeing like more kids come into the house, like they just kind of stayed to themselves because it's like it's too much going on. I'm just gonna be down here.
Right.
So that created that dynamic of, oh, he doesn't like me. And it's just like I'm trying to tell them like, no, he's just like that. Like it's not like he don't like you, but like he just thinks it's like too many of us up here and he would rather be downstairs in the basement. And I said, and it makes sense. I said, but that's just like his personality. And then of course, like you got the middle one of the group, it was a girl. And so she's looking up to me, wanting to all be up under me. But at the same time, I'm in high school and I'm like, she's girl, like, please get away from me. I had that aspect as well, and so that I'm sure definitely didn't like help create the sense of belonging too, but it wasn't that, like I didn't care for her or I didn't accept her as a sister. It was just more so like you want to play with dolls and I'm not playing with dolls at this level, but like looking at the dynamic of you're already coming into a whole new household and now this new sister that you look up to doesn't want anything to do with you. The older brothers don't want anything to do with you. And then you're still trying to adjust from the parenting styles. I feel like that's a lot to intake. And then, of course, the 2-year-old. So, from her perspective, too, I'm just a baby person. So I was all over the 2-year old, but having that dynamic of seeing her or the middle child seeing, oh, so you care about this, my little sister, but not me, and then same for the older one, which is a boy. So he like having that concept too of he felt when I talked to him, he felt the most left out of anything because he's the oldest one out of that sibling group of three. And with a 2-year old coming into the family, of course, like my mom's attention is primarily on the 2-year old, still on,
Right.
but like, okay, now this is a whole toddler. She not even potty trained. I got to work on this, and then me being there and then the girl trying to figure out where she belongs. He feels like, from his perspective, he wasn't really as noticed compared to
Right.
everybody else. And so it's very interesting me thinking about how I could come up and say, yeah, like I had a really healthy family dynamic, and all my siblings can sit beside me and they can say something completely different.
It's for for my family, it was interesting because it was myself and my younger brother. And my mom always wanted a son. I'm not sure she wanted a daughter. My dad always wanted a daughter. And so, like, our family dynamics from the beginning were very interesting because, I was the first granddaughter across the board. Like, it was all boys. And then you have me, and it's like, yay, I'm here. And everyone's like, yes. And, for me, like, the first 4 years of my life were perfect because I was everybody's like sunshine. My grandmother retired early. My grandfather retired early when I was in daycare. My grandfather literally sat at the daycare the entire day. Like they would drop me off and let me go to daycare because he knew it was important that I have like interactions with other kids. But he was there the whole day because I was the light of everybody's world. And I think like in our family, that made things difficult for my mom because, she'd always been the star and the sunlight and the, all of those things. And so now like I've taken that away. So I think that had a lot to do with like our dynamic. But when my brother was born, like things shifted. He became the golden child. Um, my dad and I were actually in a car accident when I was 4 and a half, because my brother got in sick and we were up the whole night before with him. Everyone was up with him, and then my mom ended up having to move. Like it was a whole bunch of things. But my dad fell asleep at the wheel and got into a wreck. We hit a tractor trailer truck head on. And in my mind, for a very long time, my brother was the reason we got into the car accident, because I was a kid. I didn't understand. So, but like that shifted the dynamics, at least for me and my brother, because here's this perfect, glowing golden child. And like I'm in a cast and daddy almost died because you got sick. Right. And the understanding, like we didn't, you know, Black families and therapy is a whole other thing, but like we didn't do therapy then. There wasn't any type of like trauma response for me or anyone like addressing that. And so, like, I think that had a lot to do with how I viewed my brother. And then the other side of that, it was like I had to be the perfect child all the time. And my brother could kind of do whatever. And I think a lot of like the oldest kid feels a lot of that, like, you didn't let me do this and they can just run around and run amok and no one says anything. And so like, in our family, that was a huge part of like how we viewed each other. Um, Both of my parents were judges and attorneys. So, that in and of itself is it's a whole thing. Um, and so, you were saying no was, not I'm gonna go pout about it. It's I'm gonna go fix it. For us, no was always like the jumping off point for negotiations. Like, yes, that's a Clueless reference, but also like that was how things worked in our house. Like, mom said no, okay, cool, come back and present your case. And like that's kind of how things were decided in our household. Like, if you presented the case first, you might not get the no, but if you get a no, you can always challenge it. And so like that changed the way like even now in relationships, I'm kind of the same way. If I say no to somebody and they pout, I'm like, you're just gonna accept the no? Like that's it. But like I had to recognize that like that mentality doesn't allow for the communication, right? You know, everyone doesn't have that same lens. Um, and so like when I'm thinking about like the things you listed that kind of exist within healthy family dynamics, we didn't have the open and honest communication. There might have been communication. It might not have been honest, but it was there, right? Like like thinking of things my mom told me about situations, and like later finding out that that wasn't the case, like was really hard, because it made me like question other things that were said, right? Um, I will say that for me, my dad was always super, super supportive. My mom, it felt like, or it feels like in retrospect, my mom was supportive when it was convenient. Um, and like, when we think about family dynamics, if you have a single parent household, you have one parent who is trying to be everything to everybody. And so what feels like a lack of support sometimes is just a lack of ability. But if you don't understand, like if going back to the communication piece, if you don't understand mom's not here because she had to work, all you see is mom's not here, but mom can show up for somebody else, that creates its own thing. Um, like there was physical safety, but it wasn't psychological safety in the household because I couldn't express emotions without it being, no one cares about your tears. Well, somebody cares about my tears, I'm sure, right? And so it creates this thing where you don't want to share emotions with people like friends or relationships, and like because you never learn how to do it safely. Um, I never I have never doubted that my mother loves me to the capacity she knows how to love, but that doesn't mean that I was loved the way I needed to be loved. And I think when we think about like adulthoods and going back to like where some of the origination of some of these things are, I think that has a lot to do with it. Just because someone's loving you the best way that they can doesn't mean that they're loving you the way you need to be loved.
Right.
And so like how do we acknowledge that? How do we shift that in our partners? Like I know the whole idea of love languages is under its own amount of scrutiny for different reasons, but I think there's still some truth in it that people need to show love and be loved in different ways. And so, can we acknowledge that? Can we show someone that we care about them in the way they want to be shown, not just in the way that we've been taught to show it? Um, and like, you know, adding a layer to the puzzle is being queer in a family that wasn't super supportive of it, was always interesting because I don't think a lot of people in my family kind of understood, like they didn't understand my choices. And it's not that they didn't love or care about me, they just didn't know what to do with it. um and because they weren't open to conversation, it just kind of got like shoved away. So like the whole addressing conflict thing, it's not the same type of like, oh, we're butting heads because you told me no. It's, I don't understand who you are, and it goes against what I believe to be true, so we're just going to ignore it or not talk about it. um and so it's always interesting when I think about like the dynamics of family, like that pushed me into finding a chosen family or choosing a family as opposed to like really leaning into the biological family. Which then again shifted when I had my own kid, because I want to make sure she never has that feeling, right? So she and we've had enough conversations where I think she'll be okay with me sharing this. When she came out, as initially being like maybe pansexual, um, I was like, okay. And she was like, wait, that's it? I'm like, what is this supposed to be? She was like, you don't have a problem? I was like, well, honey, you grew up with two moms, so clearly I don't have a problem. She was like, well, I just expected a different reaction. And
Yeah.
I'm like, well, do you want me to be mad? I can be mad. I won't be real, but I can pretend to be if like that's what you need in this moment. And she just kind of laughed it off. Um, but then that's part of the reason why I got into this work, is because everyone doesn't have that experience. And because like my upbringing was not ideal, I think is probably the best way to phrase that. My response to that is to be the parent who I thought I needed, or to be the partner that I needed, or to be the whatever that I needed. And I think the other side that creates conflict within family dynamics is people going the opposite way, right? I'm going to do exactly things that were done for me, healthy or not. Who cares? Right. So I think that was one of my challenges and one of my strengths is I recognize this as not being like the healthiest dynamic for me. So how do I shift that to be healthier in my own relationships? Right. And I think that's what a lot of the work we do comes down to is how do we have these conversations and create space for people to kind of come to that own recognition, right?
Yeah.
Especially people who were close to their parents, like you know, and be like, your mom kind of sucked. Like you might think it, but you don't want to say that, right? So how do we help people kind of get a better understanding of just because this is the way it was done doesn't mean that's the way it has to be done, right? And I think when we are able to address that, maybe just in conversation, maybe not even in therapy, but just like having open and honest conversations with our friends, you know, we become that like guidepost, that touch point of wait, hold on, let me think about this now, right? With context, with maturity, with other experiences. Um, my brother and I are not super close right now. I think my brother is phenomenal. He's brilliant. Um, but because of like our different views of the way we were raised, like we still butt heads about that. Um, our dad passed in 2018, and you know, for him, I think he had to reconcile a lot of those feelings of disconnect from my dad in that moment that I think he's still healing from. Whereas for me, I was super close with my dad. I was involved with a lot of his care. And so, I didn't have that same level. But now with my mom, it's flipped. My mom is getting older and um, he has a lot of responsibility with her, where because of she and I's relationship, I'm less involved. And, I think we don't always recognize that the things we do in childhood with our parents comes out a lot as we get older. Um, and then the adult relationships there too. So, it's all those things.
Yeah. I think one thing that really stood out for me, I don't know if this is like what you said word for word, but I definitely had to write it down because I was like, that's a quote that I need to save. But you said something along the lines of like, just because somebody is loving you the way that they can't, like the best way that they can, doesn't mean it's the best way for them to be loved, something like that.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's a really key part because that's what, in the work that I've done, that's where I've seen the most shift at the start point of moving from an unhealthy family dynamic to a healthy family dynamic is getting parents to understand that, I guess, what's it called? Love languages. I think
Hmm.
that, yes, like you being there, like being like a physical, affectionate type parent is the way that you show love to your daughter, but your daughter actually really is craving words of affirmation and like just giving them like that understanding and seeing that shift and seeing the parent implement it, like you slowly start to see like the dynamic shift. And I think that that's a big part in any type of family, even when it comes to like not necessarily just focusing on the parent and child relationship, but like the parent and parent relationship too, of having that understanding of, that just educating about like, I guess, love languages as a whole and the importance of that too as it comes into looking at family dynamics.
I do a lot of couples counseling, and that has been maybe like the first thing I say in a session. And, it's that light bulb moment because I'll use the stereotypical socialization normalized approach of mom and dad, right? Or husband and wife. The husband goes to work all day. He comes home, he makes sure all the bills are paid, he does all of this. And for him, he's like, if I didn't love you, I wouldn't work so hard. And then the wife is like, that's great. I appreciate it. But like, I also need you to tell me I'm pretty. I need you to randomly buy me flowers because it's Tuesday and not because you did something and you're in the doghouse and you want to get out of it. Like, I think even in our friendships, it's the same thing. Like, we feel like we're showing love the best way we know how to. But if the person doesn't feel that they're being loved and cared for and respected and all these other things, like, what are we doing? And then like we get mad because you're like, well, so and so did this and I do this and da 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 da. Like that's great, that's fantastic. But what did they ask you to do?
Right.
Because when you have unexpressed needs, unexpressed emotions, unexpressed desires, you're setting yourself up for failure because people can't fix a problem they don't know exists. And I think that's the huge thing when we think about like family dynamics as a whole. If you are doing things the way you want to do them without any conversation or interaction about like what somebody needs, and you're mad because like they don't respect the work I put into it, well, did you ask them what they wanted? Or like the parents who like buy their kids all the things and like, kid is sitting playing a $500 PlayStation when he really just wants a hug, right? Like we do all these things that we think need to be done without ever having the conversation about what actually needs to be done. And like I think when we get to kind of the root of the dynamics is what are you doing and why are you doing it? Are you doing it for you or are you doing it for them? And if you're doing it for them, is it what they want or what you expect them to want?
Yeah.
Right? You know, and then you get mad when they don't accept it the way you want them to, but like you didn't do what they wanted you to do. You just like it's like I think the best example is like one Christmas, my mom got me like all of these crazy toys, and I was like, yay, but where's my filing cabinet? And she was like, what? I'm like, I wanted a filing cabinet. She's like, you're 9. You don't need a filing cabinet. I'm like, but I want it. Like, I have papers that need to be filed. Like, of course, now we know there's a little neurodivergence, a little neurospiciness there that maybe explains some of that. But like, all I wanted was a filing cabinet. And so I was ungrateful because I had this pound, like this mountain of toys and I just wanted a filing cabinet. And though, like now as adults, we've had the conversation, like my mom gets it now, but at the time, I was super ungrateful to her. And I was like, no, I appreciate it. I'm thankful, but like, I just really wanted this one thing
Yeah.
that you probably could have gotten from free, like from a curb somewhere, right? But like, I think parents get into that trap, partners get into that trap. Like, are we asking what people want, or are we just doing what we think they should want?
Exactly. I think that's a huge point to make. Um, which actually takes us into one of the questions that we have to answer, which just is, what do you do when you don't have a healthy family dynamic? And I think that for me, it was really hard to generalize that an answer to that because it depends on there's so many different types of dynamic and depends on like what about it is unhealthy. But I would say if I had to generalize it, I would say I think just more so really having an understanding and learning that family dynamics are going to change and they're going to evolve. And I believe that it can help to learn more about like managing some of the challenges that just inevitably arise from the different parts of the family dynamics, as well as educating each other about the unhealthy behaviors that actually create conflicts. So whether that be like looking at the division of labor, like how I always see like making sure like all responsibilities are kind of equal within the household, understanding the difference between discipline versus punishment, I think comes into
Mm,
play a lot. Like, are you really like teaching them to help them learn something, or are you using like fear to get your desired behavior from that child?
right.
Having that awareness of being able to listen to understand instead of just listening just to talk and get your point across. Making sure like there's healthy boundaries established within the household. And also I think that being able to, this may be like opinionated, but like being able to set your children up so where they are able to voice setting boundaries with you as well, and you not like taking it as, of course, in a help respectful way, but because your kids are setting boundaries with you, don't take it as something that is deemed as disrespectful when it's really not. It's just them kind of setting healthy boundaries that they in a sense have a right to do, and not, and especially if they're doing it in a respectful way. um but then, just supporting honest expressions of feelings, like some of the things that we talked about, but also having an understanding of the importance of like a level of independence as well. I'm a firm believer of too much help can be very harmful, and so
Mhm.
you don't want to set your children up for failure by doing everything for them, but giving them that balance of, some sort of independence, giving, especially I think it just helps them learn how to problem solve too
Right.
within itself. And I think that those are some of the changes in areas that you can start with if I was to generalize it. But again, like I think that's a very very in-depth answer that can go so many different places.
Oh, absolutely. Like, it said so in the term, like these situations, one are contextual, but they are all dynamic. Like it's not static. It doesn't say the same. Things change. And I think you have to kind of address each thing as it occurs. My mentality is fix it or forget it, right? And you have to put the work in to do the fixing. If you have established this thing and this is a problem, how are we going to address it? And if you're not going to address it, you either have to get over it or walk away. Um, and like I think that's one of the things that we don't talk about enough. Like you have to protect your peace when we're talking about, especially adult dynamics, right? We have this idea that, we're supposed to stay with this person for better or for worse, but the for worse shouldn't include abuse, right? And that goes with parents, that goes with cousins, aunts, whatever, like whatever the relationship is, if it's to a point where it's unhealthy, you have to decide if it's going to be something that's fixable because some people will never change a problem that they don't like, they'll never change a behavior that they don't see a problem with.
Right.
So if you have like that one parent who is the authoritarian and my way or the highway, and they have no desire to change that, you can't make a plant grow, right? You can give all the right soil, the lights, the this, the that, and some things just aren't going to change. And people are like that. Some people are like that. So we give space for grace and growth, and we give people the capacity and the time to change. But if they're not, what are you holding on to, right? I say all the time, we don't give power to dead people or dead situations. Um, and a person doesn't have to be physically deceased to be dead to us in that capacity. Like I have family members who I no longer consider family members and they no longer have power over me. I'm not letting you control me from beyond the grave, right? So it's understanding that either we are going to put in the work to fix it or we're gonna forget it. And normally I say something other than forget it, but this is a family friendly podcast, so I won't say that thing. But like when you were talking about establishing boundaries and like kids establishing boundaries, yes, they are children, but they are also their own person,
Right.
right? We respect adults who establish boundaries. Why don't we give our kids like that same space? And for me, it's hard because sometimes the establishing the boundary is them disagreeing with you, and it's disagreeing with you about something that's a hindrance to their safety. So, like, it's not the same thing if an adult makes the decision to go get blackout drunk. Like, we can't change that, but we can change that for our kids, but also having the conversation and explaining why we said no. Like I think kids deserve explanations and apologies. And maybe not all the time. Because like I don't negotiate with terrorists, so I'm not going to explain to a 4-year-old why you can't climb into the stove. Right. But like age appropriate, you know, explanations and apologies because we want them to grow up to be those people. And then we get mad when they're like 16 and like won't have a conversation with us. Well, they haven't been able to have a conversation with you for the past decade. What makes them think they can do it now? Right. And so since we can't go back and change like the younger dynamics, we can make an effort to be more understanding, as adults, right? Um, I think the other thing is just acknowledging and allowing people to be who they are and acknowledging people and meeting them where they are, right? Because you can feel something and it's very, very real, but it doesn't mean that it's true. Like, I think that is the root of so many family issues is I feel like my mom doesn't love me. It feels real, but the truth is my mom loves me to the capacity that she can, right? And so having that understanding, I think, will allow people to have conversations around healthy family dynamics. But, I can talk all day. Um, I think the other question that I get all the time is what are some differences with, LGBTQA plus family dynamics? And let me tell you, there's a whole list of things. Like, I think for a lot of families that I know, and like in my own personal experience, a lot of the root causes for some of our dynamic issues internally and not just like with other family members is that fear, especially like the societal fear of, is our family accepted? Is our family like legal, right? Things are changing. So like that always adds a level of stress that I think a lot of people don't think about. And also like there's some of that gender dynamics based on our socialization, right? Moms are supposed to be love and sweet and caring and all this other stuff. And so then when you have a non-heteronormative family dynamic, right? You still try to fit into those heterodynamic roles. So it's like, who's dad? Oh wait, there's not one. Like that's not how this works. And so just understanding that, and even if your, you know, nuclear family has these understandings, what happens when we step outside of that? What happens when the kid goes to school and has to have the conversation about, I have two moms? Um, the biggest thing for me is when my daughter was turning 5 and she was at Head Start, and we had a planned her 5th birthday, invited the entire class, and nobody came. And parents called, reached out, told me that, they thought my daughter was a sweet kid, but they didn't want their kids exposed to like a same-sex relationship. And they used some not quite so nice language in saying that, some of them did. And so for me, it's always been that fear of, what is my kid going to have to deal with because of who I am?
Yeah.
And that permeates a lot of what we do. Like when she's older and she is queer identified now, so it's a little bit different. But when she was younger, like my partner and I would always have conversations about who she was, um, in certain events, right? Is she the other mom? Is she my mom's friend? Is she my mom's girlfriend? My kid just didn't care. She loved to tell people that she had two moms. That's my mom's girlfriend. My mom is a drag queen. Like all of these things. I'm like, thank you. Thank you for not letting me have the power in this situation. But for her, that was how she had the power. So sometimes the dynamics are different. Like if you have a biological parent, and a non-biological parent, even though the parents are married, like what happens then? Does a kid default to the biological parent? Did the kid default to maybe the biological parent but not the parent who carried the kid? Like it's all of the it's
Yeah.
all the things. Like we could have a whole conversation just around LGBTQA plus family dynamics. But I think at the end it goes back to all family dynamics. It's unique, it's dynamic, it changes, it shifts, and just because it's one way on Monday doesn't mean it's going to be that way on Friday. Um, but yeah, I think we've done a good job of kind of talking about what it looks like in our own experiences.
I agree.
What do you think?
I agree. I think we did the same as well. And I think that Um, what came up for me when you were talking, just going back a little bit, is just again the whole concept of how like family dynamics looks different. And I think that even in the same type of family dynamic, it's still different. Like the traditional ones, this traditional family is still different from that one. And it's no, I don't feel like it's ever any type of comparison. Like I feel like it's just always different just based on the things that our parents have experienced, the things that they grew up, like just a whole bunch of different things. Um, which now makes me wonder, like how do people even like I feel like this definition of family and family dynamics, I feel like will forever be evolving and forever be changing because I don't feel like it will ever just fit into the categories that these dictionaries and these websites are putting them in.
I feel very strongly that labels are for jars and for clothing. Um, and as much as our brain loves categorizations, I think we have a obligation to try to move away from that as much as we can, especially in like the spaces that we're in. Like we don't have to, everything doesn't have to have a very specific label.
Right.
Everything doesn't have to fit, this very limited definition of what we think it's supposed to be. And I think get once we can get to that point, I think we open up the opportunity for um for changes.
I agree. Well, I have a couple of resources to share with our audiences, and this is more so mainly resources for unhealthy dynamics in terms of safety, and conflict resolution type help. But the Metro's Family Safe, and these are all local, I guess, in the Nashville, Tennessee area. But the Metro's Family Safety Center is a really great resource for emotional safety when it comes to working with parents and families and the different dynamics going on for mental health related things and substance abuse things as well. I think that Catholic Charities is another one as well. Specific reasons, um, but more so like emotional, financial, more so like yeah, the financial support. And I think that Kids Central Family Resource Center is an amazing resource for kids and adolescents and teenagers and stuff to go to when they are wanting to need help and advice about how to work through and manage their family conflict that they are experiencing within their household.
Absolutely. Well, just thank you so much for tuning into this month's edition of News Conscious Conversations. We hope you were inspired, uplifted, and empowered. If you have any questions, reflections, or feedback, we want to hear from you. Feel free to leave us a comment or reach out to us via email at contact@newcounselingpllc.com.
Yes, it is our goal to help equip you guys with the tools to be the best versions of yourselves. Everyone needs a safe and supportive space that will allow them to reconnect with themselves. So if you guys ever need any additional support, we at New are here for you guys. We'll see you next time and take care of yourselves and each other. Bye.
Bye.